All right, today we're going to do a quiz review, Chapter 5 quiz study questions. So we'll go ahead and get right to it. This is going to be a calculator exercise. So 27 to the negative 4/3 power. You can use a calculator. You technically can do this without a calculator if you'd like. It'd be 3 to the third raised to the negative 4/3. What ends up happening is the exponents cancel. Anything to the negative power means reciprocal. And so the answer to this question is 1 over 81. Same with this next one. 16 is the same as 2 to the 4th. Anytime you have a power to a power, you multiply the two powers together. And so the answer to this question is 2. But a calculator can do both of these. Make sure that you don't write your answer in decimal form. You write it as a fraction. Next one. Now we actually want the decimal, so now we are asking you to do the calculator. So the cube root of 20 raised to the 4th power. And then the next one, the same thing, using the calculator, 50 to the negative 1/3 power. This next section is all about solving. You want to isolate the x. So I have x to the 4th equals 16. Now I'm going to take the 4th root of both sides. Anytime you take the 4th root of both sides, you always get a plus or a minus, and the 4th root of 16 comes out nice and even, so we get plus or minus 2. The next one, I need to isolate the parenthesis, so I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Then I'm going to take the cube root of both sides. Anytime you take the cube root of both sides, you end up getting a decimal, so we get 2.57, no plus or minus. Odd roots do not cause a plus or a minus. Only even roots cause a plus or a minus. Add 3 to both sides. And the answer to this question is 5.57. So again, isolate the parenthesis. Take the root of both sides. If it's an even root, you need a plus or minus. If it's an odd root, you do not. So here I'm going to take the 4th root of both sides. X plus 3 equals plus or minus. The 4th root of 40 is 2.51. Now I'm going to subtract 3. Go ahead and write both answers. So you're going to have negative 3 minus 2.51, which is negative 5.51, and then negative 3 plus 2.51, which was negative 0.49. Last one in this section, you're going to isolate. You're going to add 5 to both sides. Divide both sides by negative 3. And then the 5th root of both sides gets you 1.55. Next section, simplifying. And now we have a large number of problems in which we're going to need to simplify. No decimal answers on this section. I want to know what it would be as a radical, a simplified radical. So I'm going to go ahead and do a factor tree. That's the way I explained it to my class. So now I'm doing a cube root, which means I need 3 of a kind. So those come out. And I have a 2 and a 5 that do not. So therefore, the answer, they stay inside the radicals. So the answer to this question is 2 from the group of 3. And then the cube root of 10. Most common mistake is to forget the actual cube root and to actually just write that as a square root. Next one, you are not allowed to have any type of radical on the bottom of the fraction. So I would, since there's only one 5, you would need to multiply by 5 to the 2nd. Because what that does is you have the cube root of 5 times the cube root of 5 to the 2nd makes the cube root of 5 cubed, which is just 5. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply the top. So I have the cube root of 3 times the cube root of 25, which is the cube root of 75. So this one is just a square root. So I just multiply by another square root. So I have the square root of 14 over 7. Things start getting more complicated when you end up getting a binomial on the bottom. You end up having to multiply by what's known as the conjugate. The conjugate to 5 minus the square root of 3 would be 5 plus the square root of 3. Foiling. You're going to FOIL the bottom. So I'd take 5 times 5, which is 25. 5 times a positive square root of 3. 5 times a negative square root of 3. And a negative times a positive would be a negative 3. Those two cancel, leaving 22 as the denominator. Distribute the top. 3 times 5, 3 times the square root of 3. leaving me with 15 plus 3 square roots of 3 all over 22. So in the next one, very similar question. We're going to multiply by 3 minus the square root of 2. That is the conjugate. I'm going to FOIL the bottom. 3 times 3, which is 9. I already know this one and this one are going to cancel, leaving me with just the last one, which is 2. So the denominator is going to end up being 7. Distribute on the top, 3 square roots of 5 minus the square roots of 10. If you are in radical form, you can only add and subtract radicals that are the same base or same radicand. So I'd have the cube root of 56 and the cube root of 189. I cannot currently add together. Now let's simplify. 2 times 28, 2 times 14, 2 times 7. There's a group of 3 2's, which makes 2 square root of 7. But there's already a 5 times that, which makes 10 square root of 7. Next one, I'll go ahead and change colors here. Square root of 189. It's divisible by 3. 3 times, 63. 3 times 21, which is 3 times 7. There's a group of 3 3's and a cube root of 7. By the way, there's a cube root there. Times the number on the outside makes 6 cube roots of 7. So now 10 cube roots of 7 plus 6 cube roots of 7 makes 16 cube roots of 7. So you're only allowed to add together radicals that have the exact same radicand and exact same index. So I end up with the cube root of 7 and cube root of 7. I can add those two together. More simplifying. So now I have numbers and letters that I need to simplify. 2 times 24, 2 times 12, which is 2 times 6, which is 2 times 3. I need a fourth root. So a group of 2's come out with a fourth root of 3 left over. Anytime you're doing a fourth root, you need groupings of 4 of a kind. So if there's 7 A's, one group of A's get to go out and 3 A's do not. B, the fifth, one group of B comes out with 1 B left over. And the last one, there's 3 complete groups. Currently, I've got the cube root of 128x to the 6th over the cube root of y. I only want to worry about the bottom first. So it can't be simplified, so I would need to multiply, since there's currently only one y, I would need to multiply by y squared. So the bottom now is the cube root of y times the cube root of y squared, which makes the cube root of y cubed, which is just y. Now the numerator, cube root 128x to the 6th, y to the 2nd. I now need to look to see if I can simplify that any further. So I'm going to go down here to give myself some space. 128 is 2 times 64, 2 times 32, 2 times 16, which is 2 times 8, which is 2 times 4, which is 2 times 2. There is a group of 3 and another group of 3, which makes 4 cube root of 2. X to the 6th, that's 2 complete groups and a y squared left over. So again, on your quiz, not only do you need to make sure you rationalize the denominator, then you also need to make sure you simplify the numerator. This can be a challenging question for many, 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 many people. What happens when I have x to the 1/3 over x to the 2/5? Let's see if we can get it down to 1x. So a common denominator, this would be x to the 5/15 over x to the 6/15, which makes 1 over x to the 1/15. So now I'm down to at least one variable. However, you're not allowed to have a fractional exponent in the denominator of the fraction. So now I'm going to bring the same thing down here. I'm going to multiply by x to the 14/15, which gets you x to the 14/15 on top and just x on the bottom. Now, some people are going to say, why can't I not subtract again? If you subtract, you're going to end up getting right back to this one, which then means you have to get to the same, you have to multiply by x to the 14/15, and you'll end up going around and round. So D is as hard as this gets. You have the numbers in front, You have the x's and you have the y. So let's first start with a number. 24 divided by 6. Those are just numbers, so 24 divided by 6 is just 4. I have a negative exponent. This is x to the negative 1/4. So I can move that to the bottom as x to the positive 1/4. So now I have x to the 1/2 times x to the 1/4 makes x to the 3/4 because I can add the exponents. And then the last one, I have y to the 2/3 over y to the 1/5. I get a common denominator. So the common denominator would be 15. So this is y to the 10/15, y to the 3/15, which makes y to the 7/15. So all I did so far is reduce each one. I reduced the number, I reduced x, and I reduced y down to one letter. Now, the trouble is the denominator still has a fractional exponent, so I would need to multiply by x to the 1/4. And so now my final answer, 4 x to the 1/4, y to the 7/15, all over x to the 1st. Graphing. First, you have to come up with what is the domain and what is the domain. So what values of x am I allowed to start off with? Well, I always have to make sure the radicand equals 0. That is the initial number. So when I put 2x minus 6 equaling 0, x equals 3, that is the first number in my xy chart. Beyond that, you can kind of pick any number you want. There really isn't any rhyme or reason to these numbers. Ultimately, you want to try to get integer values. So if I plugged in, let's say 4, I'm not going to get an integer value. I'm going to end up getting the square root of 2 minus 4. So whatever that decimal happens to be. If I plug in 5, that one's going to be an integer. So 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. Negative 2. So that'll at least give me a picture as to what this is going to look like. So 3, negative 4. 5, negative 2, and so you're talking about a square root function. And so now the x values are greater than or equal to 3, and the y values are greater than or equal to negative 4. That is your domain and your range. Cube root functions. Again, now the domain and the range is all real numbers. So if the domain is all real numbers and the range is all real numbers, now I can pick any numbers I want. So I'm going to start off with 0, and I'm going to get 3. I'm going to plug in 4. I'm going to get 1. I'm going to plug in negative 4. And again, a graphing calculator could be of great assistance here. I'm going to get 5. So negative 4, negative 5, 0, positive 3, whoops, sorry, negative 4, positive 5. Sorry about that mistake there. Positive 4, positive 1. And so it's going to make a zigzag going left to right. Next one. Write the rule. So now a horizontal stretch by a factor of 3. You need to replace x with 1/3 x. So again, horizontal stretch, you replace x with the reciprocal x. Translation 5 units to the right, so I'm going to replace x with x minus 5. And so now distribute. So I get 1/3 x minus 5/3 minus 2. So I end up with 1/3 x minus 11/3. And then I want 2 units down, so I'm going to subtract 2. And so the g of x function, in which you go horizontal stretch of 3, 5 units to the right and 2 units down. Last one. Vertical shrink by a half. Anytime you're doing a vertical shrink, you're taking the entire function times a half, so you end up getting a half square root of x minus 2 plus 7 halves. Followed by a reflection on the x-axis, the entire function times -1. So -1 half, x minus 2. Notice I did not distribute the negative into a radical, minus 7 halves, and that is my new function. If you have any questions, make sure you talk to your teacher, and then good luck on your test.